The night our reactor failed, the storm outside wasn't what terrified us. It was the thought of calling the human. Looking back, that fear seems almost absurd. But at 2:13 in the morning, with Kareth Hollow buried beneath a blizzard and the temperature plunging past -40 degrees, it felt painfully reasonable. The emergency siren screamed across the village as our thermal core shut down without warning, and one by one, every shelter began losing heat. Frost spread across windows, lights flickered, children cried. We all knew exactly how long we had before the cold started killing people. Kareth Hollow had survived disasters before. We had endured failed harvests, frozen water lines, fuel shortages, and winters so brutal they ripped insulation from rooftops like paper. We had rebuilt every time. But never this. Never a dead reactor in the middle of the coldest night of the year. Never with rescue teams trapped by the storm. Never with thousands of lives depending on a repair that no one in the village knew how to make. Someone finally whispered the words no one wanted to say. Call the human technician. The room went silent, not because anyone doubted he could fix it, because everyone knew what his invoice was going to look like. I was standing in the council chamber when the lights flickered for the third time and went out completely. For 3 seconds, no one spoke. Then the emergency strips along the floor turned blue, and every face in that room looked older than it had a moment before. Mayor Selv tried to keep his voice steady as he asked for a status report. The answer came from the wall terminal in a flat, cheerful tone that made all of us hate it immediately. Primary reactor offline. Heat distribution failing. Nursery zone at 48 degrees and falling. Medical storage at risk. Estimated village survival window. For hours. For hours. That was how long our home had before the cold stopped being uncomfortable and became a sentence. Outside, the storm pressed against the dome with both hands, howling over the ice fields and rattling the old support beams above us. Kareth Hollow was not an important place that mattered. Important colonies had backup grids, orbital support, corporate guarantees, and engineers with polished badges. We had patched cables, borrowed generators, and one maintenance crew made of farmers who knew which pipe to kick when the water stopped moving. Our village sat in a frozen valley on the edge of a trade route nobody used unless they were lost, desperate, or underpaid. We mined blue salt, grew fungus grain under heat lamps, and told ourselves that was enough. Most cycles it was. That night, it was not. The reactor room camera showed a dark chamber filled with steam, warning lights blinking like tired red eyes. Our chief mechanic, old Marin, stared at the feed with his lower hands trembling. He had kept that core alive for 22 years, with scrap metal and stubbornness. But even he stepped back from the console. He said the words none of us wanted to hear. We need an off-world repairman. The chamber went silent again. But this silence was different. It was not fear of the cold. It was fear of price. Off-world repair crews did not come cheap. Not to villages like ours. They charged travel fees, hazard fees, emergency fees, and then another fee for explaining the first 3. We had called them twice in my lifetime. Once they arrived too late. Once they refused to land after reviewing our credit balance. Mayor Selvek opened the village account on the main screen. The number glowed there, small and humiliating. Not enough for a corporate technician. Not enough for a licensed fusion team. Barely enough for fuel, food, and the next shipment of medicine. Someone whispered that we could offer blue salt futures. Someone else suggested land rights, though everyone knew frozen land was just ice with paperwork. Then my daughter called from the nursery shelter. Her voice came through my wrist, calm, thin, and brave in the way children sound when they're trying not to scare adults. She asked if the heat would come back before morning. I told her yes. I lied so smoothly it frightened me. That was when Marin found the listing buried in the emergency contractor network. One available technician within range. Independent human named Jack Mercer. Equipment class personal. Estimated arrival 57 minutes. The mayor frowned at the word human, as if the screen had made a spelling error. We had all heard of them, of course. Soft-skinned death-worlders with strange manners, strange food, and an even stranger habit of volunteering for problems that did not belong to them. But this one was not a fleet engineer, not a disaster team, not a corporate specialist with a ship full of drones. According to the listing, he was a repairman, just a repairman, and at the bottom of his profile, where the contractor system displayed required payment, the number was still too high. Mayor Selv closed his eyes. "We cannot afford him," he said. No one argued because truth does not become kinder when spoken loudly. Still, he sent the distress call. Not because we believed the human would help. Not really. We sent it because the nursery temperature had dropped another 2 degrees. The medical storage alarm had started blinking yellow, and hope, when stripped of dignity, will press any button it can reach. 57 minutes later, through a wall of blowing ice and static, a dented little shuttle appeared over Kareth Hollow with one working landing light and no escort. It touched down outside the council dome like it had fallen out of a junkyard and changed its mind halfway. We watched through the frosted glass as the hatch opened. A man stepped out into the storm wearing a faded brown work jacket, heavy boots, and a knit cap pulled low over his ears. He was not large by our standards. He did not carry a military case or command a swarm of machines. In one hand he held a single scratch toolbox. He looked at our dying village, then at the storm, then at the dark reactor tower rising behind us. And somehow, that was the first moment all night when I felt truly afraid, because Jack Mercer did not look surprised. Jack Mercer crossed the landing pad like the storm was only a mild inconvenience, and that annoyed me more than it should have. Everyone else moved through Kareth Hollow weather with caution. We leaned into the wind, protected our breathing vents, clipped safety lines to the guide rails, and prayed the ice did not find a seam in our coats. The human just walked. Not quickly, not dramatically, just steadily, one boot after another, toolbox swinging at his side, shoulders hunched against the cold, in the practical way of someone who had worked in worse places and had stopped being impressed by weather. Mayor Selv ordered the outer doors opened, and the pressure lock swallowed Jack Mercer in a cloud of white vapor. When he stepped into the receiving hall, half the council had gathered there to stare at him. I wish I could say we welcomed him with dignity. We did not. We looked him over like shoppers inspecting a damaged tool on a clearance shelf. His jacket was patched at one elbow. His gloves did not match. A strip of silver tape held one corner of his toolbox shut. His face had the tired calm of a man who had been awake too long and had expected to remain awake even longer. He removed his knit cap, shook eyes from it once, and looked around at us with plain gray eyes. No bow, no salute, no offended expression, just assessment. "Who is in charge?" he asked. His translator gave the words a flat, simple shape. Mayor Selv stepped forward, trying to regain the authority that panic had stolen from him. "I am." "You are Jack Mercer." "Yes, sir." The human glanced toward the ceiling as another warning tone pulsed through the hall. "That alarm means heat distribution, right?" Marin made a small clicking sound of surprise. "You recognize the tone?" Jack pointed with 2 fingers toward the wall panel. "Same pattern as old Yolara industrial systems. Different language, same bad mood." That was the first odd thing he said. Not impossible, just odd. Yolara systems were not common. Most licensed contractors needed a database to identify them, and this human had named the manufacturer after hearing half a warning tone in a freezing hallway. Still, one lucky guest does not make a miracle. I told myself that several times. Mayor Selv cleared his throat. "Before you begin, there is a financial matter." There it was, the shame we had dragged him through a storm to hear. The council shifted uneasily. Marin looked at the floor. I looked toward the nursery corridor where the emergency heaters were already running too weak. Jack did not move. "How bad?" he asked. The mayor opened his mouth, closed it, then chose honesty because there was nothing else left to sell. "We cannot pay your full emergency rate. Not tonight. Possibly not this season." A few council members flinched, as if the sentence had struck the room. I watched the human carefully. This was the moment we understood. Contractors had a look when they decided a village was not worth saving. Their eyes went distant. Their voices became polite. Their bodies leaned half an inch toward the door before their mouths found the excuse. Jack Mercer did none of that. He only set his toolbox on the floor, knelt beside it, and pressed 2 fingers against the latch, as if checking whether the cold had frozen it shut. "Do you have coffee?" he asked. Mayor Selv blinked. "Coffee or tea? Soup works? Anything hot?" The translator repeated the word hot with almost comic seriousness. Nobody laughed. We were too confused. The mayor stared at him. "Mr. Mercer, I just told you we cannot pay. I heard you." Jack popped the toolbox open. Inside were hand tools, cable seals, old diagnostic tabs, and a roll of something that looked suspiciously like common tape. I also heard that nursery alarm when I walked in, so unless your money is down in the reactor physically blocking the intake valve, it is not the first problem. That sentence moved through the room like a small electrical shock. Not loud, not heroic, not even especially warm, but every one of us felt it. Marin lifted his head. The mayor's throat worked once. I remember thinking that humans had a strange way of being rude and kind at the same time. Jack pulled out a compact scanner, smacked it against his palm until it lit up, and aimed it at the nearest maintenance panel. The device chirped, coughed, then displayed symbols I could not read. "Old grid," he muttered. "Bad insulation. Emergency bypass. Probably older than some of your council members." One elder stiffened. Jack did not notice, or did not care. "Where is the core access?" Marin stepped forward quickly. Too quickly for a man his age. "I will take you." We started down the main corridor, past families wrapped in thermal blankets, past vendors closing frost-lined stalls, past children watching the human with wide, silent eyes. Jack looked at them only once. His face did not change, but his grip tightened around the toolbox handle. I saw it. I know. I saw it. At the time, I thought it was pity. Later I understood it was calculation, not cold calculation. Human calculation, the kind that measures time, tools, risk, and decides the impossible is simply late. At the reactor stairwell, a burst pipe had glazed the steps with ice. Marin warned him to be careful. Jack tested the first step with his boot, nodded once, and kept going. The rest of us followed slowly, clinging to the rail. Halfway down, the lights filled again. Total darkness swallowed the stairwell. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered a prayer. Then a small beam snapped on from Jack's shoulder, steady and white. He had clipped the light there before entering the dark, before the outage, before any of us thought to ask for one. He did not look back. He just said, "Stay close." Cold systems like to fail in groups, and for the first time since the reactor died, every alien in that stairwell obeyed the human without arguing. The reactor chamber was colder than the corridors, which should have been impossible. A thermal core is supposed to radiate at least some heat. Even in failure, the way a dying coal still remembers fire. This one gave us nothing. When the access door rolled open, a flat wave of frozen air moved over our faces and made every breath feel borrowed. My shoulder light caught the chamber piece by piece. The circular service platform, the hanging cables stiff with frost, the emergency coolant pipes crusted white, and in the center, the primary core sitting silent behind 6 inches of reinforced glass. It did not glow. It did not hum. It looked less like a machine and more like a sealed tomb for every promise our village had ever made. Marin stepped in first, embarrassed by his own fear. This was his room, his system, his life's work. But Jack Mercer moved past him with the quiet confidence of someone entering a kitchen he had already cleaned after a fire. He did not ask for a full technical briefing. He did not demand a manual. He set his toolbox on the platform, took off one glove with his teeth, and placed his bare fingers against the side of the main control housing. I almost warned him not to touch it. Every child in Kareth Hollow knew better than to put skin on exposed reactor casing. Then I remembered he was human, and apparently humans learned safety rules only so they could decide which ones were optional. Jack held his fingers there for 3 seconds. 4, 5. "No vibration," he said. Marin's whiskers twitched. "The core is offline. Of course there is no vibration. Offline machines still complain." Jack pulled his hand away and looked at the frost pattern around the lower intake vents. "This one is quiet because something told it to shut up. That made no sense to me. Machines failed loudly." They sparked, cracked, leaked, screamed through alarms, or vomited error codes until every terminal in range begged for replacement parts. They did not shut up. Jack opened a side panel with a tool so simple it looked insulting. Marin made a wounded sound. That panel requires a keyed service wand. Jack held up the small metal tool. This is a keyed service wand. If the key is patience. He gave the latch one careful twist, and the panel popped free. Nobody said anything after that. Inside the housing, blue diagnostic fibers ran in neat bundles along the wall, but 3 of them had gone dark. Jack traced them with the scanner, not quickly, not slowly, just exactly. His eyes moved the way survey drones move over damaged terrain. Nothing seemed to surprise him, but everything seemed to matter. Mayor Selvek's voice came through my wrist, calm from above. Status. I looked at Jack. Marin looked at Jack. Somehow, within 5 minutes, all status had become human-shaped. Jack ignored us both and leaned closer to the exposed wiring. How long have you been behind on payments? The question hit harder than any alarm. Marin stiffened. What? Jack tapped the side of the scanner, not judging, asking. I answered before Marin could wrap pride around his throat. 3 seasons, maybe 4, depending on how Varnex counts interest. They always count interest creatively. Jack reached deeper into the panel and pulled out a small black module no longer than my thumb. It was not part of the original reactor design. I knew that instantly because it looked new, clean, and smug. Its surface bore the silver triangle of Varnex's dominion, the corporation that owned half the valley and most of our debt. Marin stared at it, as if it had crawled out of his own pocket. That cannot be there. Jack turned the module over. It can. It is. He connected it to his scanner. The device flickered, then spat out a stream of red text. Jack read for a moment, and his face changed for the first time since he had arrived. Not anger, not shock, something quieter and worse. Focus with the warmth removed. Your reactor did not fail, he said. The chamber seemed to shrink around us. Then what happened? I asked. Jack looked up at the dead core, then toward the ceiling, toward the village above us, toward the nursery shelters and the medical lockers, and every family counting minutes they did not know they were losing. It was locked remotely. Marin took one step back. A payment lock? No, Jack said. Payment locks reduce output. They do not cut heat to occupied shelters in a storm. His voice stayed calm, which somehow made the words feel heavier. He unplugged the module and held it where we could all see the little corporate emblem shining in his palm. This is an eviction trigger. For a moment, the only sound was the wind vibrating through the tower supports. Then, the main terminal blinked awake by itself. Avernex's message filled the screen in polished gold letters, bright and polite and monstrous in its perfect grammar. Outstanding balance unresolved. Asset recovery protocol active. Vacate property to preserve remaining infrastructure value. Jack read it once. Then he closed his toolbox very slowly and opened the bottom compartment we had not noticed before. Well, he said, that changes the job. The bottom compartment of Jack Mercer's toolbox did not open like a normal storage tray. It unfolded. Thin metal sections slid outward with soft clicks, revealing sockets, coils, insulated clamps, and strange little adapters packed so tightly that no space had been wasted on beauty. Marin leaned closer despite himself, old fear losing a brief argument with professional curiosity. Those are not civilian tools, he said. Jack did not look up. They are not illegal. That is not what I said. Good. He lifted out a flat black case about the size of a paperback book and set it beside the Varnex module. The case woke under his hand, glowing with a plain white Terran symbol I did not recognize. Not corporate, not military, at least not in the polished way alien militaries love to mark their property. It looked simpler than that. Older, like a warning sign that had stopped caring whether you understood it. Jack connected 3 cables from the case to the exposed panel, then paused and looked toward Marin. I need your village grid map. Marin hesitated. The grid is patched. It will not match any official diagram. I did not ask for the official one. That more than anything made Marin trust him. He pulled a folded plastic sheet from inside his coat and spread it across an empty crate. Not a clean technical schematic. A handwritten mess of notes, corrections, crossed-out lines, pipe routes, heat loops, and little symbols only someone who had loved a machine for too long could understand. Jack studied it for 10 seconds, maybe 12. You bypassed the east nursery loop through the grain dryer. Marin's mouth opened. During the year of the pump shortage, smart, one word. That was all. But old Marin straightened as if someone had handed him back 20 years of dignity. Jack tapped 2 points on the map. If I restore main output through the standard channel, Varnx will shut it again. If I route through industrial heat recovery, the system will think it is protecting infrastructure. Can that heat the shelters? I asked. Not comfortably. He looked at the frozen core glass. But alive is a good first setting. The terminal chirped before anyone could answer. The gold Varnx message vanished, replaced by a timer. 60 minutes until forced asset preservation cycle. Unauthorized interference will void remaining service protections. Jack stared at it. There it is. I felt the blood leave my hands. What does that mean? Marin answered, and his voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. It means the reactor will seal itself. Permanently? Not permanently, Jack said. Just arrogantly. He slid under the main console before any of us could decide whether that was confidence or madness. Only his boots remained visible, planted against the frosted deck. Tools clicked in the dark space beneath the panel. A spark flashed once, bright enough to make me flinch, but Jack only muttered, "Rude," and kept working. Above us, the timer continued counting down. 59 minutes 58. The mayor's voice came through my wrist, calm again, strained and surrounded by background noise. The nursery zone is at 44 degrees. Families are asking whether they should move to the grain hall. Jack's hand appeared from under the console. Tell them yes, but slowly. Keep the children wrapped. Do not open exterior corridors. I repeated the instructions before realizing I had just taken emergency shelter orders from a man lying on the floor with half his arm inside our reactor console. No one questioned it, not even the mayor. Then the human did something stranger. He started humming quietly, off-key. Some earth tune maybe, or just a rhythm to keep his hands moving. It was completely inappropriate. The village was freezing. A corporation had placed a timer on our survival, and the only person who seemed calm enough to function was humming under a machine that wanted to stay dead. I wanted to resent him for it. Instead, I found myself breathing in time with the sound. Marin noticed too. He knelt beside the console holding Jack's light steady, without being asked. "What do you need?" the old mechanic said. 2 clean copper leads, a manual pressure valve, and whatever passes for a resistor in this century. Marin rushed to a cabinet and began digging through parts. I stood uselessly near the door until Jack's voice came from under the console. "You council recorder," I stiffened. "My name is Terran." "Terran, good. Start recording everything. The module, the lockout, the timer, all of it. For repair documentation, no." Jack slid out just far enough for me to see his face. Frost clung to his eyebrows. His cheek was smudged with gray dust. His eyes were steady as stones. For court, the word landed with a different kind of heat. Varnx owned our debt. Varnx owned the maintenance contract. Varnx owned the land rights beneath our homes. But suddenly, Jack Mercer was not looking at them like owners. He was looking at them like evidence. Before I could answer, the chamber lights flickered red. A new alarm sounded lower than the others. Marin turned sharply toward the upper feed. "Shuttle signatures," he said. 3 of them. The screen cleared through static and showed sleek corporate craft descending through the storm. All polished silver curves and bright Varnx markings. They landed beside Jack's dented shuttle-like knives beside a lunchbox. Jack watched the feed for exactly 1 second, then slid back under the console. "Ignore them. They are Varnx inspectors," I said. "They will come down here probably." Another tool clicked. Another cable snapped into place. Then we should make sure they arrive in time to be disappointed. The Varnx inspectors did not hurry. That was the first thing I noticed on the security feed. They crossed the landing pad under heated shields, dry and polished inside their little bubble of corporate comfort. While our own people huddled in corridors, counting blankets. The lead inspector was tall, silver-skinned, and dressed in a coat that probably cost more than our entire grain harvest. Two assistants followed behind him, carrying legal tablets instead of tools. That told us everything. They had not come to fix anything. They had come to make sure nothing got fixed without permission. By the time they reached the reactor level, Jack Mercer had already changed the shape of the room. Not physically, not in any way I could point to at first, but the panic had shifted. Marin was moving with purpose now, pulling parts from cabinets, stripping wires, checking pressure marks. I was recording every screen, every warning, every corporate message that appeared and vanished. Even the chamber itself seemed less like a tomb and more like a patient on an operating table. Not alive yet, but no longer abandoned. Jack stood at the central console with his sleeves pushed up, one hand inside an open panel, the other holding a cable between his teeth while he read two diagnostic screens at once. The door opened behind us with a hiss sharp enough to cut conversation. "Step away from the system," the lead inspector said. His translator gave his voice a smooth, expensive calm. Jack removed the cable from his mouth. "Good evening." The inspector looked at him as if politeness from a human repairman were a stain on the floor. "You are interfering with secured Varn's Dominion infrastructure." Jack glanced at the timer. 41 minutes remained. It was interfering with a village. One assistant made a small sound of disbelief. The other began recording us, which was funny because I was already recording them. The lead inspector stepped closer, boots shining on the frosted deck. "This settlement is in default. Asset Preservation Protocol is legal under Section 17 of the development contract." Mayor Selvek's voice came over the comm, shaking with anger. He was too tired to hide. "There are children in emergency shelters." The inspector did not look toward the speaker. "Varn's Dominion advised relocation 3 notices ago." Jack nodded slowly as if something had just become clear. "So you did know they were still here." That stopped the room for half a breath. The inspector's eyes narrowed. "Human, you are here as an independent contractor. You have no standing in this matter." "Sure." Jack reached into the panel and tightened something with a short twist. The console gave a soft beep, and one row of dead indicators flickered. Amber Marin inhaled sharply. The inspector noticed. "Cease work immediately. Cannot. Hands are cold. If I stop now, they will cramp." It was such a small, stupid answer that one assistant actually looked offended on behalf of language itself. The inspector's polished calm cracked just enough to show the contempt underneath. "You seem to misunderstand your position. Your invoice has not been approved. Your labor is unauthorized. Your presence is tolerated only until we decide otherwise." Jack looked over his shoulder at him. "Not fully, just enough. That how you talk to everyone? You are freezing out. Or am I special?" Nobody moved. I had heard insults before, loud ones, theatrical ones, the kind thrown in markets and council meetings. This was different. Jack had not raised his voice. He had not even sounded angry. He simply placed the truth on the floor between them and let the inspector step around it if he could. The inspector chose not to try. "You have 60 seconds to remove yourself from this chamber." Jack turned back to the console. "No, I do not." The first assistant lifted his tablet. "A formal trespass notice has been issued." "Neat." Jack plugged in another cable. "Send me a copy." The second assistant finally spoke. "You are risking civil penalties beyond your capacity to pay." At that, Jack smiled. Not warmly, not broadly, just a tired little human smile that made my stomach tighten for reasons I could not explain. "Buddy, I own a shuttle with 1 landing light and a coffee maker that only works when it is scared. You are not going to impress me with debt." Marin made a sound that might have been a laugh if fear had not strangled it halfway out. The lead inspector's face darkened. "This system contains proprietary architecture." "No," Jack said. "It contains heat pipes, bad firmware, and a dirty lockout module wearing a legal costume." He tapped the black Varnex device on the crate without looking at it. "And since that module cut thermal support to occupied shelters during an active storm, I am pretty sure the costume is about to fall off." The inspector's gaze snapped to me and my recorder. For the first time, he looked less annoyed than careful. "Stop recording." I did not know what to do. My fingers trembled around the device. All my life, Varnex had been the name on contracts, warning letters, supply crates, land deeds, and bills we paid before we paid ourselves. Then Jack said, "Do not." One word, quiet, final. So I kept recording. The timer dropped below 39 minutes. The reactor gave a low click somewhere deep in its frozen body. Not a hum, not yet, but a click, a response. The inspectors heard it too. Jack leaned closer to the screen, eyes moving fast. "There you are," he murmured. The lead inspector took one step forward. "If you bypass that lock, Varnex will classify this as sabotage." Jack picked up a copper lead, fed it through a clamp, and finally turned to face him completely. "That is going to be hard to argue why," the inspector demanded. Jack pointed toward the dark core behind the glass. "Because I am not bypassing your lock." Another click sounded deeper this time, followed by a faint vibration under our feet. Jack's smile vanished. His hands moved to the controls, precise and calm. "I am waking up everything you were using it to hold down." The vibration under our feet was so faint at first that I thought fear had invented it. Then the frost on the lower pipes trembled, loosened, and fell in tiny white flakes onto the deck. Marin stared at the core glass with both hands frozen in the air. Not from cold now, but from disbelief. "That line has been dead for 6 years, he whispered. Jack did not answer. He was busy listening to the machine. "I mean that exactly." His eyes were on the screen. His hands were on the controls, but his head tilted slightly toward the floor, as if the reactor were speaking through the metal beneath his boots. The Varnex inspector noticed it too, and his confidence finally began to fray. "What did you activate?" he demanded. "Old work," Jack said. "The kind your company forgot because it was not profitable." The amber lights on the console spread from 1 row to 3. A pressure gauge climbed one mark, then another. Somewhere above us through the calm, someone shouted that the grain hall vents had coughed warm air for half a second. Half a second was not salvation, but in a freezing village, half a second of warmth feels like a rumor from heaven. The lead inspector moved closer to the console. Marin stepped between him and Jack before thinking better of it. He was old, thin, and shaking, but he did it anyway. Jack glanced up once, saw him, and said softly, "Appreciate it, but I need you on valve 2. Marin blinked, then hurried to the side station with the relief of a man given something useful to do before courage ran out. The inspector pointed at Jack's black Turan case. "Identify that device." "Portable field mediator. That is not a recognized Varnex tool. I have been trying to avoid those." The assistant with the legal tablet spoke quickly. "Unapproved hardware connected to proprietary energy infrastructure is a direct contract violation." Jack nodded toward me without looking. "Recorder still on?" "Yes." "Great. Please make sure you got the part where they objected to unapproved hardware while standing beside the unapproved lockout device they hid in a civilian heat system." The assistant's mouth closed. It was the most satisfying sound I had heard all night. The timer dropped to 32 minutes. Then 31. Jack reached into the open panel and pulled 3 fiber leads apart with careful pressure. The console screamed a warning. My skin tightened. Marin shouted from the side station, "If those lines desynchronize, the coolant loop will reject the restart. Only if we ask permission." Jack clipped 2 leads into his tearing case and left the third hanging loose. "We are not asking." The inspector's voice sharpened. "That is reckless." Jack looked at the frozen nursery temperature readout on the side screen. 41 degrees. No. Reckless was designing a village to depend on a remote switch owned by people who do not live here. He pressed a command. The case flashed white. The reactor did not start. Instead, every emergency light in the chamber shut off at once. Total darkness. Someone behind me made a small, frightened sound. Then Jack's shoulder lamp clicked on again, steady as a lighthouse. He had expected that too. Of course he had. "Marin," he said. "Manual valve opening slowly. I know what slowly means. Human. Good. Just checking." The old mechanic turned the wheel. Metal groaned deep under the platform. Not breaking, not failing. Waking. The floor vibration strengthened until I could feel it in my teeth. My wristcom exploded with voices from above. Heat in Corridor 3. Medical storage stabilizing. Nursery vents active for 5 seconds then dropping. Jack frowned for the first time. There is another limiter. The Varnix inspector said nothing, which was how we knew it was true. Jack turned toward him. Where? I am under no obligation to assist unauthorized tampering. Fine. Jack looked back at the console. Then be quiet, while I embarrass your engineering department. He moved fast after that. Not frantic. Fast. There is a difference. Frantic wastes motion. Jack wasted nothing. He changed clamps, bridged ports, checked resistance, and used 2 tools at once in a way that made Marin stop turning the valve just to stare. Valve, Jack said. Marin snapped back to work. The side monitor populated with old village infrastructure files. Things I had never seen. Buried heat wells, abandoned battery stacks, emergency wind turbines. Locked out after Varnex bought the maintenance rights. Jack's eyes narrowed. You had enough backup capacity for 3 villages. Mayor Selv heard that over the comm what? The inspector lifted his chin. Those systems were decommissioned for efficiency. Jack gave a short laugh with no humor in it. That word does a lot of dirty work for you people. The timer hit 27 minutes. Jack opened a new command line then stopped. His hand hovered over the keys. For the first time he looked uncertain, and my hope nearly collapsed. What is wrong? I asked. He pointed at a locked file buried under layers of corporate encryption. That is the master limiter. If I crack it wrong, the system seals faster. Can you crack it right? Jack looked at the reactor, then at the village temperature map, then at the inspectors. His tired gray eyes became very still. No, he said. My heart sank. Then he reached into the bottom of his toolbox and pulled out a red adapter wrapped in old cloth. But I know someone who already did. The red adapter was the first human object in that room that made the Varnx inspectors go completely silent. Until then, they had treated Jack Mercer's equipment like junk with ambition. A collection of old parts and stubborn habits held together by nerve. But the moment that red piece touched the console light, the lead inspector's silver face lost its color. I noticed. Jack noticed. Jack always noticed. You recognize it, he said. The inspector swallowed once. That device is restricted. Was restricted. Jack unwrapped the cloth with careful hands. The adapter was scratched, scorched along one edge, and stamped with faded black letters that translated poorly through my lens. Terran Emergency Reconstruction Authority. Marin leaned over the crate, eyes wide. What is that? Jack plugged the red adapter into his field mediator. A very old argument between humans and bad infrastructure. The console flashed red, then white, then filled with a language I had never seen. Human letters, sharp and plain. Jack read them as easily as breathing. The Varnix assistant stepped back. That interface cannot connect to our system. Jack kept typing. It already did. That should be impossible. You folks keep using that word like it is a warranty. The chamber floor pulsed under us, warmer now by a fraction, as if the village itself was holding its breath. Above, voices crackled through the calm. The grain hall was up to 50 degrees. The nursery vents were cycling again, still weak, but alive. Every update should have calmed me. Instead, it made the timer feel cruel. 24 minutes. 23. The inspector pointed at the red adapter. Where did you get that? Jack did not answer immediately. His fingers paused over the keys for the first time that night. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Not louder, not softer, just farther away. A mining moon outside Kepler Band, 17 years ago. Give or take. Corporate grid failed during a dust season. 2,000 workers under a cracked dome. No official rescue for 6 days. No one interrupted him. Even the reactor seemed to listen. The company said the math did not work. Too expensive to save the facility. Too dangerous to send a team. So, a bunch of independent human engineers built a new heat loop out of cargo rails, kitchen pumps, and pieces of 3 broken crawlers. He tapped the adapter. One of them wrote a universal handshake for locked utility systems. Ugly code. Impolite code. Saved a lot of people. Marin's voice was careful. You were there. Jack looked back at the screen. I was young enough to think coffee counted as sleep. That was all he gave us. No grand speech, no heroic memory, just a small sentence and hands that started moving again. But the room changed around him. Until that moment, Jack Mercer had been a repairman with strange tools. After that, he became something else, a survivor of places where official systems had given up, a man trained by emergencies that did not care about policy, a human who had learned that machines, corporations, and weather all had one thing in common: they could be argued with. If you brought the right wrench, the red adapter forced open the hidden file. The master limiter unfolded across the screen in layers: energy caps, remote compliance locks, dormant backup restrictions, and legal disclaimers embedded directly into heat controls. I felt sick reading it. They had not simply turned our reactor off. They had chained every backup we owned and called the chain efficiency. Jack scanned the code once. Then again. "Marin," he said, "your east wind turbines still spin in storms." "Yes, but Varnex disconnected the converters. They disconnected the billing path, not the physics." Marin blinked, then smiled for the first time all night. "The converters are under the North Ridge." "Good, Terran. Tell the mayor to send 2 warm bodies with flashlights to the ridge access. But no one touches anything until Marin says so." I relayed the order. I did not ask why he called our people warm bodies. Somehow, from a human, it sounded like a compliment. The inspector found his voice again. "This is theft of controlled energy assets." Jack turned, and the tiredness in his eyes was gone now, burned away by something cleaner. "No, this is a civilian emergency under active life support failure. You buried a lock inside critical infrastructure during lethal weather under Terran relief law. That makes your asset a hazard." The inspector stiffened. "Terran law does not apply here. Not yet." Jack pressed one key. My recorder pinged. His field mediator had just copied every file to my device, the mayor's office, and somewhere off-world. The assistant's tablet chirped at the same time. So did the other one. So did the inspector's wrist unit. Jack had sent it to them too. "There," he said. "Now everybody has homework." The master limiter turned green. The old backup grid appeared beneath it, not as dead icons but as waiting doors. Jack laid both hands on the console. "Marin, when I say now, open valve 2 another quarter turn. That will overload the return loop only for 8 seconds. And after 8 seconds, Jack's mouth twitched. Then we find out if your repairs are as good as I think they are." Marin stared at him, insulted and delighted at the same time. "Human, my repairs are better than your shuttle." "Low bar," Jack said. Now Marin turned the valve. Jack hit the command. The reactor chamber filled with sound. The sound did not explode. Through the chamber, it gathered. First came a low metallic purr from beneath the platform. Then a rising sequence of clicks, as old relays remembered their purpose one by one. The frost on the core glass loosened in pale sheets and slid down like melting curtains. Amber lights became green. Dead monitors blinked awake. Somewhere deep in the walls, pumps that had slept for years began to turn. Rough at first, then steady, then strong enough that the deck hummed under my boots. Marin kept one hand on valve 2, eyes fixed on the pressure gauge, whispering numbers like prayers. 6 seconds, Jack said. 7. The return loop spiked into yellow. Marin's fingers tightened. 8. Jack hit another command. The gauge dropped cleanly into safe range. The old mechanic let out a sound, and I had never heard from him before. Half laugh, half sob, and immediately pretended he had coughed. No one believed him. Above us, the village calm erupted into overlapping voices. Heat in the grain hall holding at 58 degrees. Medical storage back within safe range. Nursery zone rising. 46, 48, 51. I heard my daughter's teacher crying over the channel, trying to sound professional, and failing beautifully. Mayor Selv asked for confirmation 3 times because hope had made him stupid. I could not blame him. I was staring at the core, watching a soft blue glow bloom behind the glass, and my own recorder shook in my hand. Jack did not celebrate. Of course he did not. He leaned over the console, frowned at the numbers, and said, "That is ugly." Marin spun toward him. Ugly human. The reactor is alive. Alive is not the same as healthy. Jack tapped the display. Your distribution grid is bleeding heat through half the lower conduits. The Northridge turbines are feeding at 30%. Battery stacks are accepting charge, but 2 are sulking. Marin blinked. Sulking technical term. The Varnex inspector found his voice at the worst possible moment. This restart is unauthorized. Any improvements made to Varnk's infrastructure become corporate property under development. Clause 9. Jack looked at him, then looked at the recorder still glowing in my hand. Say that again, but slower. The inspector did not. Smartest thing he had done all night. Jack turned back to the console and opened a new control layer. Marin, do you have access to the old water reclaimers? They are offline. Everything here is offline until it gets embarrassed. He pulled a second adapter from the case and patched it into the side port. The system map expanded beyond the reactor, beyond the heat grid, into places Varnex had written off as obsolete. Water filtration, greenhouse lamps, clinic sterilizers, storm shutters, emergency beacons, all of them appeared in dull gray. Jack cracked his knuckles once. Let us make this worth the landing. For the next 12 minutes, I watched a human repairman do something that did not fit inside the word repair. He did not simply restore power. He rearranged failure. He took weak outputs and paired them with dormant backups. He redirected waste heat into shelter floors. He linked wind turbines to battery stacks through converter paths that Varnex had marked impossible. He made the greenhouse lamps pulse at a lower frequency to save power without killing the fungus grain. He turned the clinic sterilizer back on by stealing heat from an unused cargo lift. Every time a warning appeared, he answered it before the alarm finished speaking. The inspectors watched in stiff, offended silence, like priests witnessing a miracle performed with stolen kitchen utensils. The timer on the screen reached 10 minutes and stopped. Not paused, not delayed, stopped. Then it vanished. In its place appeared a plain system message, Local Emergency Authority established. The lead inspector stared at it. Who authorized that? Jack pointed upward. The people freezing in the building. That is not a recognized authority. It is tonight. The calm line from the North Ridge crackled. 2 villagers reported the turbines were spinning clean. Marin ordered them to secure the access panels and come back inside. His voice shook, but his commands were crisp. He sounded younger. The village temperature map turned from blue to yellow, 1 district at a time. Shelter floors warmed. Hallway ice began to drip. The medical storage alarm cleared. Then the nursery readout crossed 68 degrees, and every adult in the reactor chamber went quiet. There are moments when a village changes without moving. That was one of them. We had not been rescued by a fleet. No official banner had descended through the storm. No polished corporate team had saved the day for a fee we could never pay. One tired human with one ugly toolbox had walked into the cold and made our entire world start breathing again. Jack finally stepped back from the console and rolled his shoulders. His hands were red from cold, grease, and pressure marks. He looked exhausted. He looked ordinary. That was the worst part. The core behind him was glowing brighter than it had in years. The village grid was running cleaner than it had since before I was born, and Jack Mercer looked like a man wondering whether his coffee had gone cold. The inspector looked at the restored system, then at Jack. His voice came out thin. What are you? Jack picked up the black Varnex module, dropped it into an evidence bag, and sealed it with a strip from my recorder kit. Working, he said. The inspectors left the reactor chamber before the heat fully returned, which told us more about them than any testimony ever could. They did not check the shelters. They did not ask about the nursery. They did not look at Marin's shaking hands or the frost melting from the walls of our homes. They simply gathered their tablets, sealed their expensive coats, and walked back into the storm with the careful dignity of people trying not to appear defeated on camera. Jack made sure they stayed on camera. He sent the reactor logs, the lockout file, the eviction trigger, and every second of their conversation to 3 places I had never heard of: the Galactic Relief Court, the Terran Civil Infrastructure Board, and something called the Public Interest Emergency Archive. The last one sounded harmless. It was not. By sunrise, every news channel within 2 sectors had the story. By noon, Varnk's Dominion issued a statement claiming the lockout had been a misunderstanding. By evening, 19 colonies with similar contracts demanded independent inspections. Within 3 days, Varnex lost its regional development license. Within a week, the phrase asset preservation became a joke people used when they meant cruelty with paperwork. But that came later. That night, we were too busy learning what warmth felt like when you almost lost it. Families moved back from the grain haul, slowly carrying sleeping children wrapped in blankets. The medical storage lights glowed steady green. The greenhouse lamps shone soft gold over trays of fungus grain that would live after all. In the nursery, my daughter pressed both palms against a floor vent and laughed because warm air was pouring through it, like summer had found a secret tunnel into winter. I wanted to thank Jack then, but he was already in the maintenance bay, sitting on an overturned crate with a dented cup of something hot between his hands. The coffee substitute we gave him was bitter enough to punish most species. He drank it without complaint, which either meant humans were tough or Earth had terrible beverages. Marin sat beside him, guarding the toolbox like it had become a holy object. Mayor Selvek stood in front of Jack with the village account open on his tablet, humiliation returning now that immediate fear had passed. "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully, "we still cannot pay your full emergency rate." Jack looked up from the cup. "I know. We can arrange installments. Blue Salt Futures Labor Exchange. Perhaps land rights after the review board clears the dispute. No land." The mayor froze. "Then what do you require?" Jack rubbed one hand over his face, leaving a streak of gray dust across his cheek. For a moment, he looked older than he had in the reactor room. Not weaker, just tired, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. A place to park until the storm clears. A real cup of coffee, if anyone in this valley knows what that is. And Marin's permission to come back tomorrow and fix the return loop properly. Marin made an offended noise. "There is nothing wrong with my return loop." Jack stared at him. Marin stared back. Then the old mechanic sighed. "There are 3 things wrong with my return loop." "5, Jack said. "But 3 are personal." I should have laughed. Everyone should have laughed. Instead, Mayor Selvek's hands began to tremble around the tablet. "You saved us," he said. Jack looked uncomfortable with that sentence, as if praise were a tool he did not know where to store. "I fixed the system." "No," the mayor said, and this time his voice did not shake from fear. "You stayed." The room went quiet. That was the truth none of us could stop hearing. The reactor mattered. The evidence mattered. The collapse of Varnek's power would change our valley for generations. But before any of that, before the court, before the news, before the old grid came alive under human hands, Jack Mercer had been told there was no money. He had been given the clean excuse every other contractor had used. He could have turned around. He could have lifted his dented toolbox, walked back through the pressure lock, and left our little frozen debt to become someone else's regrettable statistic. He did not. Jack looked toward the nursery corridor where children were laughing near the vents. His expression softened for half a second, so quickly I almost missed it. "Where I come from," he said, "you do not leave people in the cold." That was all. No speech, no demand, no heroic pose, just one human sentence, plain enough to fit in a pocket and heavy enough to rebuild a village around. We had thought humans were strange because they came from a death world and survived impossible weather, hungry predators, unstable ground, and storms that could tear cities apart. We were wrong. The terrifying part was not that Earth made them hard. The terrifying part was that after all that, they still chose to be kind. Not soft, not naive, kind in the way a locked door is kind when it stands between children in winter. By the next season, Kareth Hollow had a new sign above the reactor stairs. Marin made it himself, from scrap plating and heated blue salt glass. It read, "Local Emergency Authority." Under that, in smaller letters, someone carved a phrase the whole village had memorized. Humans do not leave because they are unpaid. They leave when everyone is safe. And every winter after that, when the storm came down over the valley and the reactor hummed steady beneath our feet, We told our children about the night a human repairman arrived with one toolbox, no promise of payment, and the most dangerous mercy the galaxy had ever underestimated. It.